The signal traveled through the void, bouncing from one relay station to another, growing weaker with each passing second. A desperate call for help, filled with fear and hopelessness, raced across the stars. Jorvax 3, a small colony on the edge of the known galaxy, was burning. The Zerine Empire had arrived without warning, bringing fire and death. Their warships darkened the sky, their weapons tore through buildings, and their soldiers marched through the streets, hunting down the helpless. The Jorvaxians were a peaceful race, never built for war. Their people were scientists, farmers, and traders. They had no great warships, no powerful weapons, only hope. Hope that someone somewhere would hear their distress signal. But they knew the truth. No one would come. Across the galaxy, the message played on screens and speakers in different alien worlds. Some watched in silence. Some turned away. The great civilizations of the galaxy, the Varric Dominion, the Ulran Federation, the Mizari Council, heard the call. They whispered among themselves, weighing the risks. The Zyrene Empire was ruthless. They destroyed any species that resisted them. No one had ever stopped them. The Ulran ambassador sighed as he switched off the transmission. "We cannot help them," he said. "It is already too late." The Mizari Council debated for an hour before reaching the same conclusion. They would not risk war with the Zerine. One by one, the powerful races of the galaxy turned their backs on Jorvax 3. The Zerine expected this. They wanted the Jorvaxians to scream into the void, to realize no one would save them. But their mistake was letting the signal reach Earth. Deep in the Sol system, inside a heavily guarded station orbiting Mars, the distress call arrived. A young officer, Lieutenant Daniel Harlow, was the first to hear it. His screen flickered as the weak signal stabilized, bringing desperate voices through the speakers. "This is Jorvax 3. Please, we are under attack. The Zerine are here. Anyone who can hear this, please, help us. The transmission cut off, replaced by static. Harlow's hands clenched into fists. He had read reports of the Zerine. He knew what they did to planets that couldn't fight back. He stood up, his pulse racing, and ran toward the command center. "Sir," he called out, pushing past officers and engineers. "You need to hear this." Admiral Carter, a tall man with steel-gray hair, turned to face him. His sharp blue eyes studied Harlow for a moment before he nodded. "Play it." The distress call played again. The room fell silent. Officers and strategists, men and women who had fought wars before, felt something burn in their chests. Anger. Humanity was new to the galactic stage, but they had already made their reputation clear. They did not tolerate cruelty. Admiral Carter's expression didn't change, but when the message ended, he turned to his officers and said 3 words: "Prepare the fleet." The Terran High Command gathered in Earth's orbital station. Generals, admirals, and diplomats took their seats around a long metal table. The room was dimly lit, the holographic display of Jorvax 3 glowing in the center. "The Zerine have already begun their extermination," a tactical officer reported. "The Jorvaxians have no defenses. If we wait, the colony will be wiped out." Ambassador Reed leaned forward. "The Zerine will see this as an act of war," she warned. "They are one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy." Admiral Carter's voice was calm, but firm. "Then let them." The room fell silent. A general finally spoke. "We have the firepower. We have the ships. The only question is, do we have the will to do this?" Carter stood, looking at each person in the room. "The galaxy already sees us as unpredictable, dangerous. Maybe it's time we show them why." No one objected. Moments later, a message was sent across all Terran fleets. "All available warships, rendezvous at Rally Point Omega. We are going to war." Across the Sol system, warships prepared for battle. Enormous battlecruisers, sleek destroyers, and heavily armed frigates powered up their engines. Pilots rushed to their fighters. Soldiers loaded their weapons. The crews stood ready. In orbit above Earth, the TSS Revenant, humanity's most advanced warship, took its place at the head of the fleet. It was a monster of a ship, larger than anything the galaxy had ever seen, carrying weapons no one outside of Earth had ever witnessed. On board the Revenant, Admiral Carter stood on the bridge, watching as ships formed up around them. "We have our orders," he said. "We answer the call." The fleet turned toward the distant stars. Engines roared to life. Then, with a flash of light, they jumped to war. The city burned. Smoke filled the sky. Zerine soldiers moved through the streets, their black armor reflecting the fire around them. A Zyrine commander stood atop the ruins of a government building, watching his troops. He enjoyed this. The destruction, the fear. A junior officer approached and saluted. "Sir," long-range sensors picked up something. "Strange." The commander frowned. "Strange." The officer hesitated, then handed him a tablet. Data scrolled across the screen. The commander's 4 yellow eyes narrowed. The readings were clear. Something big was coming. A fleet. A human fleet. The Zyrine commander laughed. "Humans? They're fools to come here." He turned to his officers. "Ready the defenses. When they arrive, we'll show them why the Zyrine Empire has never lost a war." But he had no idea what was coming. Humanity had arrived. The Zyrine Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds, and no species had ever dared to challenge them. Their war machine was unstoppable, their fleet unmatched. When they invaded Jorvax 3, they expected the same outcome as always: fear, surrender, and extermination. No one in the galaxy had ever resisted them and survived. But this time, something was different. A new enemy had answered the call for help. Humanity had arrived. The Zyrine commander stood on the bridge of his warship, the Dreadfang, his 4 yellow eyes narrowing as he watched the holographic display in front of him. Strange energy readings had appeared at the edge of the system, too organized to be random. Then, one by one, massive objects emerged from the void. His claws tightened around the armrest of his command chair as the readings became clear. Warships, dozens of them. And not just any warships, human warships. The bridge fell silent. Zyrine officers exchanged uneasy glances. The commander's jaw tightened. He had heard of humans before. Newcomers to the galactic stage, unpredictable, aggressive when provoked. But this was impossible. No one had ever seen a fleet like this. The ships were massive, larger than anything in the Zyrine Navy. They had strange angular designs, their hulls reflecting almost no light, as if they had been built to absorb the darkness of space itself. And at the center of it all was a behemoth of war, unlike anything recorded in Zyrine intelligence. The TSS Revenant. On the bridge of the Revenant, Admiral Carter stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his blue eyes fixed on the enemy fleet ahead. The Zyrine had spread their forces in a blockade formation, confident that no one would challenge them, but that confidence would be their downfall. Carter turned to his officers, his voice calm. Weapons hot. Full combat formation. Across the fleet, human warships adjusted their positions with mechanical precision, forming a tight spearhead formation. They did not hesitate. They did not wait for negotiations. There would be no diplomacy today. This was war. The Zyrine commander sneered, leaning forward in his chair. They think they can challenge us. Destroy them. Zyrine warships moved into attack positions, their cannons glowing with crimson energy. The fleet opened fire, sending a wave of plasma and missile barrages toward the human ships. But something was wrong. The human ships didn't dodge. They didn't retreat. They advanced. The first wave of Zyrine attacks struck the lead human warships. But instead of explosions and crippled vessels, the Zyrine saw something terrifying. The human ships absorbed the impact. Their shields flared but held firm, stronger than anything the Zyrine had ever seen. Then, before the Zyrine could react, the humans fired back. The Revenant's main cannon charged with a deep, ominous hum, its energy output so intense that the Zerine sensors spiked into dangerous levels. A moment later, it fired. A single beam of pure destruction tore through the battlefield. The Zyrine ship directly in its path didn't just explode, it ceased to exist. The beam punched through the first ship, then the next, then the next. 5 Zerine warships vanished in an instant. Panic spread through the Zyrine fleet. This was not a normal battle. This was annihilation. The human fleet pressed forward, their weapons carving through enemy ships with terrifying efficiency. Missiles that moved too fast to track, railguns that fired projectiles at near-light speed, and energy weapons that burned through armor like it was paper. The Zerine, for the first time in history, were outmatched. Aboard the Dreadfang, the commander watched in shock as ship after ship disappeared from the battlefield. This was not how it was supposed to happen. The Zyrine were conquerors. They were the strongest in the galaxy. But these humans, they fought like monsters. The bridge doors slid open, and a Zyrine officer ran in, his scales pale with fear. "Sir, we need to retreat. We can't." The commander snarled and grabbed the officer by the throat, slamming him against the wall. "We do not retreat," he growled. "We are Zerine. We." A deafening explosion shook the Dreadfang. Warning sirens blared. The commander stumbled, releasing his grip. Another explosion. Another. The flagship was under attack. Aboard the Revenant, Admiral Carter watched the enemy fleet falter. He turned to his weapons officer. "Focus fire on the flagship." The Revenant's guns roared to life. The Zyrine flagship shuddered as rounds tore through its hull, puncturing decks, breaching its shields. Fires erupted along its surface. The once mighty warship was now a burning wreck. The Zyrine fleet was breaking apart. Some ships tried to flee. Some fired wildly, desperate to hold their ground. But none of it mattered. The outcome was already decided. A transmission from the Zerine commander came through, his voice filled with desperation. "Humans, we are willing to discuss terms of surrender." Admiral Carter stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, without hesitation, he gave the order. "No." The Revenant's main cannon fired one last time. The Zyrine flagship was erased from existence. The battle was over. Jorvax 3 was safe. But the galaxy had just witnessed something it would never forget. Humanity had arrived. And they were not to be underestimated. The wreckage of the Zerine fleet drifted through space, broken and lifeless. Fires still burned in the shattered remains of the once mighty Dreadfang, its hull ripped apart by the relentless firepower of the human warships. The battle had been swift, brutal, and absolute. Humanity had sent a message, not just to the Zyrine, but to the entire galaxy. On the bridge of the TSS Revenant, Admiral Carter stood in silence, watching the debris field through the viewport. The Zerine had begged for mercy. They had received none, not after what they had done. A transmission came through from the surface of Jorvax 3, the planet the Zerine had tried to conquer. The screen flickered to life, revealing the face of a Jorvaxi elder, his deep-set eyes filled with awe and disbelief. "Humans," he said, his voice trembling, "you saved us. We called for help, but we never thought. No one ever thought." He paused, struggling to find the words. Carter nodded. "You're safe now." The elder's eyes glistened. "The Zerine do not leave survivors. Every time they invade, they wipe out entire species. We were next, but you." He shook his head, still in shock. "We owe you everything." Carter exhaled slowly. He had seen the reports before coming here. The Zerine Empire didn't conquer planets. They erased them. Cities turned to ash, populations slaughtered. The Jorvaxi had been days, maybe hours, away from extinction. The Admiral turned to his officers. "Prepare ground teams. We need to assess the damage and help stabilize their defenses. The Zerine won't be back anytime soon, but we're not leaving this planet vulnerable." Across the fleet, human dropships deployed, descending to the surface of Jorvax 3. Troops disembarked in armored exosuits, moving through the war-torn cities, distributing supplies, treating the wounded. The Jorvaxi watched in amazement. They had expected warriors. They had not expected saviors. Meanwhile, deep in the black void of space, something else was happening. A single Zerine warship, its hull scorched, its engines barely functional, limped through the darkness. It was one of the few that had escaped the massacre. On board, Zerine officers spoke in hushed, frantic voices. "We must inform the High Command," one of them said, his claws clicking nervously. "They need to know what happened here." The captain of the vessel, his face still scarred from a blast during the battle, bared his fangs. "They will not believe us." "Then we make them believe," another officer hissed. He gestured toward the holographic display, where recordings of the battle played in endless loops. The destruction, the power of the human fleet. They think we are invincible. We are not. The humans proved that today. A heavy silence filled the room. Finally, the captain straightened. "We return to the homeworld. The Emperor must know." The ship vanished into hyperspace, carrying with it the news that would shake the Zerine Empire to its core. Back on Jorvax 3, night had fallen. Fires still smoldered in the ruined cities, but for the first time in weeks, there was no fear in the air. The Jorvaxi survivors gathered in the streets, staring at the human soldiers walking among them. Some whispered in reverence. Others simply watched, still struggling to believe they were alive. Admiral Carter stood near the landing zone, speaking with his officers. "We'll stay here until the Jorvaxi can stand on their own again. They need time to rebuild." One of his officers, a grim-looking commander named Vega, crossed his arms. "And what about the Zerine? They won't take this defeat lightly." Carter's expression darkened. "No, they won't." He turned his gaze to the sky, where the wreckage of the battle still floated. The Zerine thought they ruled the galaxy, but now they had seen what humanity could do. And soon, the rest of the galaxy would know as well. The Zerine homeworld, Vorak Prime, was a planet of towering obsidian spires, darkened skies, and endless warships being constructed in orbit. It was the heart of the Zerine Empire, a civilization built on conquest, fear, and absolute dominance. No species had ever dared to challenge them. No enemy had ever inflicted a wound on their mighty fleets. Until now. Inside the Imperial War Chamber, deep within the black citadel of the Zerine Emperor, a tense meeting was underway. High-ranking warlords, their scaled bodies covered in ceremonial armor, stood in a semicircle, their glowing yellow eyes fixed on the center of the room. A holographic projection of the battle at Jorvax 3 played before them. They watched in silence as their warships, their invincible armada, were torn apart. They saw the TSS Revenant erase their flagship in a single shot. They saw human warships shrug off attacks that should have crippled them. They saw their once feared forces run. The room filled with uneasy murmurs, but none dared speak too loudly in the presence of Emperor Xalzor, the ruler of the Zerine. He sat on a throne of polished obsidian, his crimson robes draped over his massive, battle-scarred frame. His 4 eyes were locked on the images before him, watching as his great fleet was annihilated. When the recording ended, silence fell over the chamber. Finally, one of the warlords stepped forward, his voice filled with barely controlled rage. This is impossible. No species has ever defeated us in open battle. The humans. They are not like the others." Another warlord interrupted, his voice low. His claws tapped against his armored wrist. "They did not come to negotiate. They did not ask for mercy. They came to destroy." The Emperor's claws tightened against the arms of his throne. How many ships were lost? A trembling officer stepped forward. 73 warships, my Emperor, including the Dreadfang." A heavy silence followed. The Dreadfang had been one of the most powerful warships in the entire Empire. Losing it was unthinkable. Another warlord growled, baring his fangs. "The humans must be crushed before others in the galaxy see them as a threat. If we do not strike now, our enemies will grow bold." The Emperor leaned forward. His voice was deep cold. "What do we know of these humans?" One of the intelligence officers hesitated before speaking. "They are a relatively young species. Their homeworld is called Earth. Their military strategy is unlike anything we have seen before. They fight without hesitation, without fear. Their technology is advanced, but more than that." He hesitated. "They fight like they have nothing to lose." The Emperor's eyes gleamed with interest. "Nothing to lose." The officer swallowed. "According to intercepted communications, humans have faced countless wars on their own world. They have fought each other for thousands of years, perfecting warfare before they even reached the stars. Their history is soaked in blood, but unlike us, they do not seek conquest. They only fight when provoked. And when they do not stop until their enemy is utterly destroyed." A chilling realization passed through the warlords. They had assumed humans were just another species to be crushed. But these humans, they were something else. Finally, the Emperor spoke again, his voice like a distant storm. "Summon the full might of the Empire. Every ship, every warrior. We will show these humans their place in the galaxy." The warlords slammed their fists against their chests in salute. "Glory to the Empire. Death to humanity." Across Vorik Prime, the Zyrene war machine roared to life. Massive warships, larger than cities, began powering up. Fleets that had once conquered entire sectors were now being assembled for one purpose: to wipe humanity from existence. But what the Zyrene did not know was that their declaration of war had already reached Earth. In the depths of the United Terran Command on the human homeworld, a war council was being held. Admirals, generals, and intelligence officers sat around a massive holographic display, showing the movement of Zyrene forces. The Zyrene were bringing everything. Admiral Carter, standing at the head of the room, studied the data with an unreadable expression. He had expected retaliation. But this was a full-scale invasion. A grim-faced general spoke. "They'd want to end us before we become a true threat." Carter nodded. "Then we'll show them they're already too late." Across Earth's colonies, warships were being mobilized, battle groups formed. Humanity had never started a war in space, but now they would finish one. The Zyrene fleet moved through the void like a storm of death. Thousands of warships, each bristling with weapons, cut across space in perfect formation. It was the largest invasion force in their empire's history. They weren't coming to fight a war. They were coming to end humanity forever. Deep in the heart of the fleet, aboard the massive dreadnought Tyrant's Wrath, Emperor Xalzor watched the holographic displays with a cold, calculating gaze. Reports from his spies suggested the humans were mobilizing, but it did not matter. The Zyrene had crushed species far older, far more advanced than these upstarts. A warrior approached and saluted. "The fleet will arrive at the human colonies in 3 cycles, my Emperor." Xalzor nodded. "When we reach them, we will not negotiate. Burn their planets. Show them the cost of defying us." The warrior bared his fangs in a grin. "By your will, Emperor." But across the galaxy, humanity was not waiting to be attacked. At Fortress System Orion 7, a heavily fortified sector at the edge of human space, the United Terran Navy had gathered. Hundreds of warships, from nimble destroyers to colossal battleships, were in formation. On the bridge of the TSS Revenant, Admiral Carter stood before a massive holographic display, watching real-time data of the incoming Zyrene Armada. The room was tense. Officers worked at their stations, preparing for the battle to come. Communications traffic buzzed as ships checked their weapons, their shields, their battle formations. This was humanity's first true war in space. A young officer, nervous but trying to remain professional, turned to Carter. "Admiral, their numbers. They outnumber us 5-1. Carter didn't look away from the display. "That just means we'll have to kill 5 times as many." The officer blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. But around the room, other veterans smirked. They understood. The Zyrene thought numbers alone would win this fight. They had no idea what humanity was capable of. A transmission came through from Earth, the Terran High Command. The image of Supreme Commander Elena Vasquez appeared on the screen. "Admiral Carter, the Council has made its decision. We will not just defend. We will strike first." Murmurs spread across the room. The general strategy had been to wait, to defend Earth and its colonies. But now, the humans were going on the offensive. Carter nodded, his expression unreadable. "Understood. We'll be ready." The transmission cut off, and Carter turned to his officers. "Send the orders. Battle Group Valkyrie will flank them at the asteroid field. Titan Squadron will lead the main assault." One of his captains frowned. "We're attacking them head-on." Carter smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "The Zareen think they know war. Let's teach them what real war looks like." Across the fleet, orders were transmitted. Engines roared to life. Human warships moved into formation. They weren't waiting for the Zareen to bring the fight to them. Humanity was bringing the fight to the Zareen. The battle was about to begin, and the galaxy would never forget what was coming next. "You said." The void of space erupted with fire and destruction. The United Terran Navy and the Zareen Empire clashed in a battle that would be remembered for generations. The human fleet surged forward, their engines burning like furious stars, their weapons unleashing hell on the approaching Zareen armada. The Zareen had expected a cornered enemy, a desperate species clinging to survival. Instead, they found an opponent that ran toward the fire instead of away from it. On the TSS Revenant, Admiral Carter watched the battlefield unfold on the massive tactical display. Human warships danced between the Zareen formations, outmaneuvering their sluggish but heavily armed dreadnoughts. "Battle Group Valkyrie, execute the flanking maneuver," Carter commanded. At once, a squadron of human destroyers and cruisers broke off, darting into the asteroid field nearby. The Zareen had dismissed it as unimportant, but the humans had planned for this moment. Their ships twisted and turned through the rocky maze, using the asteroids as cover. When they emerged, they were behind the Zareen formation. And then, they struck. Massive explosions ripped through the Zareen rear lines as torpedoes and railgun rounds tore apart their capital ships. The Zareen commanders scrambled to respond, but the humans were already moving again, slipping away like ghosts. Meanwhile, the main human fleet crashed head-on into the Zareen Vanguard. The TSS Titan, a human dreadnought, unleashed its Nova cannons, the powerful beams melting through Zareen hulls like fire through ice. Battleships and carriers exchanged devastating blows, lighting up the darkness of space with brilliant destruction. On the Tyrant's Wrath, Emperor Xalzor watched in disbelief. Humans should not have been winning. They were outnumbered, outgunned. The Zareen had spent centuries perfecting their war machine, crushing countless species before. But now, their fleet was breaking, and the humans were relentless. His warlords shouted, demanding a counterattack. "Send in the second wave. We still have superior numbers." Xalzor snarled, his claws digging into his throne. Superior numbers meant nothing if they couldn't hit their enemy. The humans weren't just fighting. They were hunting. A sudden alert blared across the Zareen command deck, a massive energy spike coming from behind their fleet. "What is that?" a Zareen officer screeched. The answer came in the form of the TSS Revenant, bursting out of a warp jump directly behind the Zareen command ships. "Fire HFY, Carter roared. The Revenant's main cannons unleashed a full barrage. Plasma lances, railgun volleys, hypervelocity missiles. A storm of destruction ripped through the Zareen formation. Their warships, already battered and struggling, stood no chance. One after another, the Zareen capital ships exploded, their wreckage scattering like shattered bones. The once mighty invasion force was falling apart. On the Tyrant's Wrath, alarms blared. Zareen officers panicked as their fleet was decimated. The Emperor's eyes widened in rage and disbelief. "How?" he growled. "How are they doing this?" A voice, cold and calm, echoed through the Emperor's flagship. Because you picked the wrong species to underestimate. It was Admiral Carter, broadcasting directly to the Zyrene command frequency. The Emperor's claws clenched. His empire had never faced a true challenge, never known fear. But now, as he watched his once invincible fleet burn, he felt it for the first time. And humanity. Humanity was just getting started. The battlefield was a graveyard of burning wreckage. The Zyrene fleet, once the most feared armada in the galaxy, was now shattered, its ships reduced to floating husks or fleeing in panic. What had begun as a mission to exterminate humanity had turned into their greatest disaster. On the TSS Revenant, Admiral Carter stood with his hands behind his back, watching the last remnants of the Zyrene fleet trying to escape. They wouldn't make it. "Sir, their flagship is retreating," an officer reported. Carter didn't flinch. "No, it's running." There's a difference. Across the battlefield, human warships pursued the fleeing Zyrene, cutting them down one by one. They had shown no mercy to humanity, so now humanity would return the favor. Aboard the Tyrant's Wrath, Emperor Xalzor was pale with fury. His fleet, his empire's pride, was gone. His warriors dead. His name, once feared across the stars, would now be spoken with shame. "Prepare a warp jump," he snarled at his officers. But before the ship could escape, a deep rumble shook the entire dreadnought. Lights flickered. The crew looked at one another in horror. Then a voice crackled over the comms. "Going somewhere, Your Highness." It was Carter. Xalzor's eyes narrowed. He knew what was coming next. The TSS Revenant and a squadron of human battleships had locked onto his position. The humans had hunted down his command ship, just as they had done to the rest of his fleet. "Target their engines," Carter ordered, his voice cold and final. The Revenant's guns roared. The Zyrene flagship shuddered under the impact. Explosions ripped through its hull. Escape pods fired out like panicked insects. Xalzor's throne room collapsed around him. Fire and smoke filled the air. He stumbled forward, gripping the edge of his console. His empire was finished. And then the final blow came. A barrage of missiles from the Revenant's forward launchers impacted the Tyrant's Wrath, tearing through its core. The mighty Zyrene dreadnought, symbol of an empire that had ruled the stars for centuries, erupted in a blinding explosion, scattering debris across space. The last screams of the Zyrene Emperor were lost in the void. Back on the Revenant, silence filled the bridge. The battle was over. The Zyrene had come to destroy humanity. Instead, they had been erased. Carter exhaled slowly. Status: all enemy ships eliminated or in full retreat, an officer reported. "Sir, the Zyrene Empire is broken." The words hung in the air. For years, humanity had feared them. Now, the galaxy would fear humanity. Carter turned to his crew. "Send a message to every colony, every ship, every world out there. The war is over. Humanity stands victorious." A cheer erupted across the bridge, across the fleet, across the entire human race. The Zyrene had thought they were unstoppable. But today, they had learned a lesson they would never forget. When humanity answers a call for help, we answer with fire.